Hello, it's Hushjo, and today I'm here to talk about something that is pervasive in our society, and that is lazy-ass motherfuckers. And I'm also here to talk about censorship and why it is always the wrong choice. There has been a lot of talk about censorship and silencing voices recently, which is hilarious to me because most of the people that have been doing it are the same Republican conservative idiots that were responsible for storming the Capitol. Sorry, not sorry, but if you're a fucking Nazi, you deserve to be censored. You deserve to be silenced. However, this is a concerning thing. This is an upsetting thing that we would have to do that. And while I will say, when conservatives bitch about censorship, they're not really bitching about the act of censorship because they are always responsible for the majority of censorship. What they want is to have these things around where unflattering, perhaps racist, or in some way bigoted portrayals, or saying a word that they are not allowed to say otherwise, they latch onto that and they don't want it to change. Fundamentally, they don't want anything to change because that challenges their delusion of this ideal 1950s world that never fucking existed in the first place. They don't read, though. These are not people that look at something and say, oh, we can't censor that because it's a valuable record of the time and of an artistic expression. We must put it into context. No, they never say that. What they want is for it to just be left alone, presented without context, because fundamentally, they don't read, they don't care about reading, they certainly don't care about art. They don't read the one book that most of them claim to follow a religion based on. They let someone else tell them the story, just like a child that cannot read and depends on their parents to read a story to them, except they live their life by way of Chicken Little. But the thing is, when you have things that are outdated depictions, or insensitive in some way, or just completely offensive if someone doesn't consider the context, then you really are obligated to present a context, which these people just don't want. And on the other hand, we do have plenty of people, especially in the younger generations, who want to go and just get rid of all this. If it has anything problematic in it, we need to get rid of it. I do understand where a lot of them are coming from, but at the same time, I cannot agree with that. And while I do find it unpleasant to agree with conservatives on anything, because really I hate them all, I'm not really agreeing with the way that they're presenting it anyway. The way that I'm saying it is very different. What they want is for nothing to change and for, let's say, Huckleberry Finn to give them carte blanche to use whatever epithets they want. That's not acceptable, especially considering if you ever thought about Huckleberry Finn or actually fucking read the novel, they would know and see that it is a scathing satire of the southern landscape of the time and still applicable now, unfortunately. And that is the necessary thing. It must be presented that way because otherwise people are just going to read it and probably not get it because a lot of people are stupid. They are also lazy. One of the most concerning things about the younger generations, and especially some of the people that consider themselves progressive but are basically kind of turning out to be the other side of the coin from the conservatives. We cannot just do away with these things, and we shouldn't, because you've seen how that actually works. If you get rid of this stuff, or if you present it in a way that is not accurate to the time, and doesn't reflect what it was like and what it still may be like, you get something like Walt Disney's Song of the South, which presented a very pleasant image of the South at the time of incredible sociocultural upheaval and unrest, and it completely ignored the fact that people were not okay with people that had differently colored skin and ethnic backgrounds. So certainly, without any sort of context, that can be a bad thing. But these things should not be done away with. Like, take Huckleberry Finn, for example. A book of which I am very fond, largely because it presents these archetypes of characters that still exist today, and even though it is very much a product of its time, it still reflects problems in society that persist to this day, especially in the South. It is unfortunately so frequent and so often that these same people, largely conservative Republican types, don't recognize when they are not being favorably portrayed in any of these things, and they just latch on to the offensive epithets or something like that. It's the same sort of idiots that will watch something like American History X and identify with the villains. And I'm not saying that it's always wrong to identify with villains. Many of us in many minority groups would be technically considered villains a lot of the time because we are not part of the mainstream, and a lot of us don't really respect the same sort of socio-cultural foundations that a lot of people in the mainstream do. It's easy to make villains out of us. However, when you are an outright villain, an absolutely evil person, it's a little bit different. And blanket, lazy disclaimers don't work. Disney Plus doesn't do a very good job of giving you any sort of cultural context. It just says, these are outdated or offensive, and they were wrong then and they're wrong now, and that tells us jack and shit. If you actually want to know anything about what you are going to watch that may be offensive, you would have to look it up yourself, read about the cultural and social context and the context of the time, read about the culture of the time, and then go back to watching it, which no one is going to do. And we have made a trend, a pattern that is very disturbing out of being lazy and letting that define how we address problems or fail to address them. Pornhub recently did a huge purge of everybody that wasn't verified, and I will say their verification process is incredibly offensive and invasive, so I didn't do it. But I was actually thinking about putting up some art process videos there because they don't censor. Boy, was I surprised to find out that they're as lazy and stupid as Tumblr, which I'd like them to look back on, which was hilariously sad in hindsight. Pornhub was one of the places that was like, oh yeah, come here, come to us, we don't censor. Good idea, great idea. Get the people that don't want to be invaded by your stupid verification, have their gender presentations and basically everything they live for questioned by it. Brilliant. And then do away with the people that aren't willing to go through that incredibly offensive, invasive verification process because you're too lazy to have anyone address the real problems that exist in your system. So get rid of most of your content. Great, that's going to really keep people coming. Just like on Tumblr, that's going to make people just flock to your sites in droves. Except it won't. It'll kill your site. And accordingly, I deleted my Pornhub account last night because I don't work with lazy-ass censor-happy motherfuckers. I am to the point where I don't care what you're selling, because all these places are selling something. I don't care. I am not going to go with censorship. I don't care if you think your country is very well run and you want to do this on your site. Fine, go ahead. I won't be a part of it. It's why I left the sites that I left. I upload videos to YouTube primarily because it is easy. I do not support the platform though. I have completely demonetized all of my videos and I have no working professional relationship with the site. In fact, I would warn people never to go to YouTube for any reason if they don't have to. I tend to use it as a host so that I can post my videos on my Patreon and elsewhere. That's it. And believe me, I am getting the better part of that deal. But YouTube, like Tumblr, Pornhub, and all these other sites, they want to be lazy. They don't want to actually have to do any work. So, instead of actually addressing any of the problems, they make a blanket solution that harms more people and censors more people, and then they point to some imagined problem that avoids the actual problems because they don't want to address any problems. They never have wanted to. None of these companies that run these sites want to actually have to pay enough people to run the site. And it's not because they don't make enough money. It's because they are lazy and shiftless, and they want to depend on a poor algorithm that never works. They want to automate a site and have robots essentially govern it because they don't want to do their jobs. It's too demanding for them, which I would say, hey, if you don't want to be an administrator of a website that is very busy and has lots of media uploaded to it, don't be a fucking administrator for a website that is extremely busy and has lots of media uploaded to it. If you cannot afford enough people to look at the content on your server and figure out exactly where it falls on the acceptable versus not acceptable spectrum, then you should not be making a site in the first place. And if you are as big as Pornhub, or YouTube, or Tumblr, or any of those sites were at one point, you need to actually manage well. In fact, you need to actually manage at all. And sorry, not sorry, if there's a lot of people using your site, you might have to actually hire more people to do that job. And if you don't, well, your site's gonna go to shit. Just making a blanket declaration and getting rid of a bunch of people on your site isn't the solution, and it doesn't help. All it does is make people leave your site, resent the treatment that they rightly resent, and your site loses money, and it should lose money, because that is offensive. And that is perhaps ironic, but you can't keep treating people like that. You can't keep treating people like that. You cannot do that to people and expect them to come back for more. It will not work. Look at Tumblr. Holy shit. You don't have the only game in town. And even if you do, if you pull something like that, you won't for long, because people have a remarkably low tolerance for being treated like shit, because you're too lazy to actually run your site. And above all, as I've said before, to hell with the children. Don't even come at me with this whole think of the children thing. If you're a parent, it's your responsibility to fill in that context and inform your kids this is why it was offensive. Don't expect anybody else to do that, and don't expect everybody else to change the way they live for you, and certainly don't expect anyone to censor themselves or to allow censorship to happen because of you and your kids. Be a responsible fucking parent instead of being a giant fucking douchebag that expects everybody else to change their lives because you didn't know how to close your legs or use birth control. You are not owed a child. You are not entitled to that, but you're especially not entitled to tell everybody else that they have to change because you decided to have a child. So that argument does not work with me. It does not fly, it does not hold water. Censorship is something that is always wrong, and it always leads to bad things. When you build that mountain, it is so easy to fall down the side. You fall off a cliff, you slide down the side, you end up at the bottom, and you have nothing but regrets for building that mountain in the first place. Censorship silences minorities especially, and while I am A-OK silencing idiot conservative Republican bullshit that is fascism, barely contained in other rhetoric and more acceptable politically correct language. Yeah, no, fuck that. Fuck that and fuck them. They can shut the fuck up for once because they have worked for so long to try and silence literally everyone else. Because anyone else's existence outside of their delusions of an ideal 1950s world that never existed always challenges their stupidity and all of the things that they hold so dear that don't exist and never existed. Fuck that. Fuck them. On the other side of the coin, let's try and avoid the younger generations becoming as prudish, as reserved, and as stupid as those old wraiths parading around pretending to be human who call themselves the Republican Party. Be very careful when you wield any sort of tool like censorship. It is something that should rarely, if ever, be used. And even offensive things, and even demonstrably wrong things, still have a socio-cultural value to them. They must be presented in a context, but they should not be done away with, because if you do away with something and you shut it up and you lock it away, that's just going to make more people more interested in it, because it is forbidden. So you failed anyway, even if you want to try and silence that. It's not going to work. That's why I say you really have to think about this before you try and silence things like that. You might end up having exactly the opposite effect that you intended to have. But in any case, censorship is rarely, if ever, the right solution. It almost always leads to bad things. And while I am okay with silencing conservative voices because it's about damn time they had their turn, I don't want it to go too far in either direction. They should not be given an equal platform, and stupid, irrational bullshit should be called out for what it is. But satire, commentary, and something of a time should be recognized for what it is, too. It may or may not be relevant to the modern world, but in any case, it certainly needs to exist so that we never forget what we might have lost and what we have lost or what progress we've made, or what progress we haven't made. These things need to be remembered. And when it comes to censoring art, I feel like art tends to censor itself. If art is not relevant, or art is not accessible in any way to anyone, or art is a relic from a past we would like to leave behind, it will probably be left behind. Artists tend to see forward, but at the same time, not all art is relevant forever. I feel we do still need most all art, because it is a unique expression that no one else can duplicate. Not really. It is a part of our society and our culture, whichever that may be, and it is very historically important to paint that perspective for future generations. There are also plenty of parts of art that have been largely forgotten by the modern world and may allow a greater, more holistic portrait of a time. In any case, I do think art is very important, expression is very important, fiction is very important. To the ignorant, we must contextualize these things, but censoring them and promoting prudish values and prudish ideas, no, that's not acceptable. And being lazy if you are making a giant site that is supposed to welcome everyone, that's not a good idea. Stop doing it. Stop normalizing corporate culture as well. We should not have safe for work and not safe for work. That is just telling you that if something is viewed by most as not safe for work, then you must be in a profession that is not respected by the people around you. And that's also not acceptable. Don't normalize that sort of mindset. It's one of the reasons why people are in such bad situations now, because they let companies control them on and off the job. And that's not acceptable. They're not paying you enough for that. They cannot pay you enough for that. So, things to think about, and I hope you will. I apologize if there have been any veer-offs, but it has been extremely chaotic around here, so it's been very difficult to record audio. In any case, I will see you next time. You're welcome. Bye.